What's going on, everybody? Thanks for tuning back in. So today we're going to take a look at creating a very basic messaging UI to add to our Pokemon game. So anytime you've played the games in the past, you'll know that when you talk to a character or pick up an item, a little UI box pops up at the bottom of the screen. That's what we're going to take a look at tackling today. We're starting small with our UI introduction because eventually we're going to want to make more complicated examples like an inventory or a battle system, your Pokedex, things like that. So we're going to get started with something small today, and it will help us build our UI foundation so we can start making more complex examples in the future. But for now, we're just going to do a message box to get familiar with everything and then go from there. If you like everything you've seen so far, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you're feeling real generous, you can support the channel by buying a coffee. Okay, let's get into it. So usually when I make these videos, I like to record all of the typing and programming first and then do the voiceover after, but I'm going to do this one as I go along because I want to make sure that everything with the UI is in sync and so you don't lose your steps through the video. So let's go ahead and get started by creating a new scene, and you're going to want to create a 2D scene, and you're going to pick an other node here. You might be inclined to pick user interface, but we're going to throw a canvas layer on top of everything. So let's go ahead and pick canvas layer, and then you could go ahead and rename this to message manager. And then underneath this, what you're going to do, actually what you can do is you can save this first. So you can go to your scenes, and then I'm going to make a new folder for UI and just save this here. And what you can do is underneath this, you can add a control node. And the very first thing you're going to want to do is go over here, to your anchor preset and make it to the full rect. So it covers the entire screen. That way, whenever we do something on the inside, we can anchor it to this full screen. And if you have to resize it, it will resize properly with the window and everything. So let's go ahead and add two more items underneath. So all we need now is just the chat box and the font. So make sure you have a little piece of UI and some font ready to go. So as you can see, I already have this little message box UI and this Pokemon Emerald font here. And I'm not going to go over the import settings really quick, but you do have to change them. I will leave them up on the screen here so you can take a look at everything to get it to match. It took me a while to fiddle around with this, but basically you have to do it a certain way. Specifically make sure like these MDF size and pixel range is on, and getting rid of this generate minimap. Otherwise, when you try and resize the font, it might get blurry. So this took me a little while, but once you get all these settings put into place here, it should look good no matter what size it is. So underneath this, we're going to add a child node, and I'm going to look for what's called a NinePatchRect. So what a NinePatchRect is basically it takes an image, and no matter how big you make it, it will stretch the inner boundaries of that picture. So let's go ahead and get that set up now and then go from there. So what you can do is you can first, if you just want to kind of see where it is, you can make it full screen, and then you can hit the Alt key, and then you can start dragging your corners around, and you see it'll keep the size. So I would say drag it till it gets to a size that you like. You can do the full bottom of the screen if you want. I'm just going to go right here, I think. I'll zoom in a little bit here. And I think that looks good, and then I'm going to drag it down and keep it in the middle here. So right about there. And if I don't like it, I'll change it. So you'll see on the side here the texture is empty. All you have to do is drag your UI piece over to your texture, and you'll see that it fills out. However, you're going to see that it's all stretched out here, and we don't want that. We want to fix this a little bit. So what you can do is you can go to Edit Region and zoom in a little bit here. And I'm actually going to turn on Grid Snap, and I'll set it to 1 pixel just so I can get extremely accurate, maybe 2, just so I can get pretty accurate here. And what you're going to see is you're going to see basically the entire region covered by these dotted lines. If you click and hold one of these dotted lines and drag it in, you'll see that the solid line stays to the left. That marks the outer boundary of the picture. And then if you move this will mark the inner boundary of the stretch. So if you move in all of these right here, like I'm doing, and once you close it, it should fix the stretching issue that you see. So go ahead and hit close, and then you'll see that it's not stretching like it was before. And you can also take a look at the axis stretch here, which is basically describing how to stretch these sections right here. So depending on the image that you have, it might be blurry or not. So you can play around with these. You can do tile, you can do stretch, you can do fit. me zoom in a little bit just so you can see what I mean. So you can see it's pretty smooth here because it's stretched out, but if I change that to tile, doesn't really make a difference with this specific picture, but with the one you're using it might. So I'm just going to use stretch for now. Zoom back out. Whoops. And then finally, once you're satisfied with where it is, you can go ahead and go back to your anchor preset here and set the current ratio. That way if, whoops, sorry, let me make that a child of the control here. That way if the parent ever moves around or resizes it, you'll see that it stays exactly the same ratio that you created it in the first place. So go ahead and save your scene. And then finally, the last thing we can do here is we can add a child node, and you're going to want a rich text label instead of a normal label, because the rich text label is actually going to scroll along with all of your text. So put this into the middle of the box. I wouldn't have it touching the edge. I'd have it something like this. And then set your anchors to the current ratio so it stays inside of the NinePatchRects, exactly where you have it. And then what you're going to want to do, maybe type some font here. You can type placeholder. And you can't see it right now, so let's go down to the theme. I think it's theme overrides and colors, and change the default color, or just select it and you'll see that it changes it. So you can see here it's just using the default font. What you can do is you can go to the fonts down here and you can drag in the one that you've imported into your project and drag it in, and then you'll see that it changes. So the next thing we can do is go to our normal size, and let's increase the font size to 20. Oh, that's way too small. Let's try 30. Maybe a little bit bigger, 40. So there we go. The font looks pretty good, no matter how zoomed in you are, and it doesn't look blurry, so we know our import settings are correct. The next thing you can do with the font, if you wanted to get a little fancy, is you can add a shadow. I believe it's in colors, font shadow color. So if I click this, you can see that it gets a little bit bolder. But I don't want to use this as my shadow color. Maybe I'll use the little picker here and try and zoom in on that green. Give it a little green background. So that's not bad. Let me go to font sizes, or styles, and I gotta find the shadow offset. We'll give it a 1 in both directions, maybe a 2. And then the shadow outline size, we can do 1, 2, I don't know, something like that. You can play around with it till you find something you like. I'm going to actually do this. I think that looks good. So make sure you're saving your project along the way. And then once you have this here, the next step is going to be for us to program everything so that this will pop up whenever we want to send the game a message. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add this message manager to our game manager. Our game manager for all of our tutorials has been our main scene. So underneath our sub viewport here is where we're going to be adding our message manager. So go ahead and instead of adding a child node, you can instantiate a child scene, and you can look for that message manager you just added, and you can go ahead and save it. So what happens if we run the game right now? You can see that the UI is actually just popping up here in the bottom, and you can see when you full screen it, it's still staying the same ratio, the font's all good, so it's showing up in the game. So now we have to program a way to actually control it. So what we're going to do is we're going to attach a script to our message manager. And how we're going to do that is we're going to go here, attach a script, and we're going to make sure that it's C#. And I want to put this in scripts, and I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call it UI, and I'm going to leave the default name of message manager here. So I've recently switched to Godot 4.4, and you'll notice that it probably adds these little UID files here. That's just some metadata that Godot uses. You don't have to worry about these files. So we're going to go ahead and declare a namespace. And I actually switched over to doing it the newer way, which is just declaring it outside without a block. So we're going to do game.ui because this is our new UI block. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make this a singleton because we only need one instance of our message manager. And then next we're going to have two export categories. So the first category is going to be called components, and this is just going to provide us control for the two components that are inside of our message manager. So you're going to go ahead and make variables for your NinePatchRects, and I'm just going to call this box. And the second one is going to be your rich text label, which is going to be what controls the actual font. So go ahead and throw those in there. The next export category is going to be called variables. These are variables that will help control the message scrolling across the screen and whether or not it's open or not. So we need 3, and we're going to do a public bool, and this one is going to be called isScrolling. So what this bool means is that is the text currently being printed across the screen? If it's stationary, once it's all printed, this is going to be set to false, but when it's printing a message, this will be set to true. The next variable that we need is going to be an integer, which is a delay. And this is going to be the delay in milliseconds between printing each character on the screen. So we're going to go with 15, which may seem really fast, but when you have a long sentence being printed across the screen, this is actually like a decently readable speed. And then finally, the last thing we're going to have is an array of messages that are strings. Now, the type of array we're going to use is actually from Godot collections, so make sure you select the proper one. The reason we do that is so that we can read it in the inspector if we have to, and we're just going to call this messages. So we're going to have a couple of functions here, and a lot of the functions we're going to make static, so it just makes them easier to call. So we don't have to do like .instance. It's just kind of more usability on the outside of this function. So the very first thing we're going to do is create a public static void play text. So this is what we're going to call when we want to pass in some messages. Now, the parameters are going to be between 1 and n being the number of messages you want this to play. So how we're going to type this in is with the params keyword and then an array of strings, and we could just call it payload, I guess. So basically, when you call the playText function, you can just pass in as many parameters as you want instead of passing in an array. So it's kind of just like a convenience thing. The next thing we want is we want a public static bool, and we're going to call this isReading. And basically, this is just going to tell us if the box is up on the screen or not. So this is just going to be our instance.box and visible. So if the message box is currently visible, that means we're reading right now. So now we can go back up to the other function and we can check to see if we're reading. And because it's static, we don't have to identify it with our messenger instance, and we can just return. And the other thing we're going to do is if the payload.length is equal to 0, we're also going to return because we don't want to play an empty message. That just doesn't make any sense. Now here, I'm going to put a little note for us to do, and that is to signal that the message is open. We're going to come back to this because having a signal that's global for this might be a better idea in case you want to pause more than just the player. So obviously when there's a message open, we want to disable the movement controls, but maybe we want to disable other things too going on in the map. So it might be time to make some global signals. So we're going to come back to this. Next, what we're going to do is set our instance messages, and we're just going to use the spread operator in C#, which is 2 dots. Those of you that like JavaScript are used to this being 3. And then finally right here, we're going to actually call the scrolling of the text, but we haven't made that function yet, so we got to go down and make it. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a public static async void scroll text. And before we go any further, let's just go ahead and call that here. This is what's going to be responsible for printing the message across the screen and checking to see if we have anything else to do. So the very first thing we're going to want to do is check to see if our instance box is visible. So let's check to see if we're not reading, because we already have a function for that. So if we're not reading, we can make the instance.box.visible equal to true. Next, we're going to check to see if our instance messages count is equal to 0. That means we're all done. So that means we have to exit. So you could always throw a logger message into here right now if you wanted to, but I don't think we have to do that. all you have to do is set this to false. So I'm just going to copy that and put that here, and then return, because we don't have to do anything else. Now, once we've made it here, we know that we have to start playing some messages. So we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to check to see what our isScrolling is set to. And we're going to go ahead and set that to true. And we're also going to set the text to the blank of the label, because every time this scroll text function is called, it's like you're doing a new line. So let's go ahead and do instance label.text is equal to an empty string. Now what we're going to do is we're going to loop through each string, and we're basically going to print a letter, and then we're going to chop it off once we're all done with the message. So we're going to do a for each loop here, and we're going to do a char letter inside of our instance.messages at index 0, because we want to always read the first one in the queue. Then what you can do is you can say your instance.label.text, and you can do a plus equal sign because you're just basically adding to a string, and you can select the letter. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do an await, because this function is asynchronous, and then we're going to do a task.delay, and we're going to pass in our instance.delay. Oh, did I spell that wrong? That's pretty funny. I've never been really good at the English language, even though it's my native tongue. And then we're going to exit the for loop. So basically what this is going to do, it's going to take whatever message you have in that array. This instance message is 0 is basically one parameter from this payload. And then once we're all done with that, we're going to remove that from the queue and then set isScrolling to false. So instance.messages.remove, and we're going to do remove at, and we're going to do index 0. And then we're going to set our instance isScrolling equal to false. And that's because we don't want the next message to play automatically. We want the player to hit a button that will signal that it's time for us to look at the next message. Next, we're going to do two more helper functions. We're going to do public static bool scrolling. Actually, I should have put this in before. And that's just going to return our instance.scrolling. We are going to need this in a little bit. And then we're going to do a public static array, and this is for us to access the messages to see how many we have left if we need to on the outside. And that's just going to return our instance.messages. And I think that's all we need for this particular function, and you can just get rid of the imports you don't use at the top. But that's pretty much it for this one. So the next step is going to be actually signaling whether or not this box is open, playing the messages, etc., and taking care of the player state. Because when we're reading a message, the player is no longer going to be in that free state that we created for them. They're going to be in a new reading state. So if you remember, we made this player roam state, which is basically just the movement. And when we're in a reading state, we're not going to have access to any of this, just a control basically to make the UI disappear or read through the messages. So now let's make our new signals class. So if you go to your core folder, we're going to create a global like we did for this globals file right here, which controls basic settings of our game. So if you want, you can just copy and paste this, and I'm going to change this to signals, and then change this to signals. And I'm going to just go ahead and use this class to instantiate some signals that I want to be able to use across the entire game. So this isn't actually going to have any variables like this. It's just going to have some signals. And what else we're going to do is we're going to create a static function that will help us emit signals globally. So let's go ahead and just change the logging function. And I'm just going to say, loading global signals. And then I'm going to declare a new signal. And it's basically going to be opening or closing my message box. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. And how we do that is we use the signal decorator here, and we're going to do a public delegate void, and then we're going to call this our message box open. And in C# you have to add the words event handler like we did in the previous videos. And this is going to take a value, which is just going to be a bool of either true or false. And the other thing that we need is we're going to go ahead and make our static function. And this is going to have a couple parameters in it. what we're going to first do is call this, let's say, emit global signal, I guess, just to make it sound exactly what it's doing, so we don't really need to comment everything. The very first thing we're going to put in is called a string name, and this is going to be the signal name. And the second thing we're going to do is take in params like we did inside of the message manager. So basically what this means is you always have to pass a signal name and then an unlimited amount of parameters. So we're going to do a params, and we're going to use the, I believe, the Godot class variant, and then args. And then what you can do is you can log this and say that a global signal is being emitted. And then what we can do is log the signal and then log the arguments that go into it. And then finally, what you can do is call the instance.emit signal like we did in our previous classes. And all you have to do is pass in the signal and then the args. And that should be all we need for the signals class. So what you have to do is you have to make sure you go back to Godot and you go to your projects, your globals, and you add your signals here. So make sure you find it inside of your scripts. And I'm fine with calling it signals. I'm going to add it, enable it, and then I'm going to scroll it up so it's right under globals. And something you might get, I get these errors sometimes. Don't worry about that. Save it, and then just hit play on your game just to make sure everything's still good to go. I like to check once in a while. And you can see that there's a little issue. So failed to auto load signals does not inherit from node. And let's just go back to our class just to make sure. And it does. Maybe it's because I didn't import it properly and I didn't create it from the UI, but it does have a UID here. So we'll come back and fix that if we have to. Yeah, I forgot that sometimes C# and Godot is finicky, so I deleted my signals file, removed it from my globals, and then I created it here through the menu by right-clicking and then creating new script this way, and then added it to the signals, or so to the globals that way, and now when I hit play, it works just fine. So in C#, try and create it through the editor here so that it can keep track of everything, and it doesn't have to reload the file system every time you change something. Otherwise, it might mess it up with the new IDs or systems. I don't know exactly what happened, but just do it through the UI to keep it simple. So now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to enhance our state machine a little bit. So before, when we created this, our state machine, we have to actually pass in the state variable, the actual Godot object, I should say. What we're going to do is we're going to add an extra function here to make it so that we can just pass in the name of the state and it will scan the state machine it's currently in for that state. And also we're going to modify our state class to actually have the state machine as one of the variables so that we know who the state machine owner is of that state and we could just call it directly. So first go to your state class and we can go ahead here and just export our public state machine. That's all you got to put here. And then we'll fill everything back out in the UI once we're done with all this. Then inside your state machine, where you're going to make a state that looks similar to this. I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste it. And then what I'm going to do here is change this to a string. And I'm going to do a var underscore state is equal to get node. And we're going to cast the state type to it inside of the generic type. And then here we're going to pass in our new state. So this will actually give us the fellow child state of the same state machine, the variable we're looking for. And here you can go ahead and pass in the state. And the reason we're putting the underscore here is because we already have the variable here, so we don't really need it anymore. And I think that's all we need to do. So this will make changing states a little bit easier. So the next thing we're going to do is modify our Roam state and then create our message state. So let's go to our states folder. And first we're going to go to our Roam state. What we're going to do here is we're going to implement the ready function again. So you do that by typing the override and just finding ready. We don't have to call it base. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to target our signals, which is our global class. And we're going to target our instance. And we're going to see the message box open signal. And the syntax here to add something is going to be your plus equals. And what this is going to be is the value that's actually passed in, so true or false. And then we're going to define our function here. So what we're going to check to see is that if this is true, we want to switch states to the message state. So we're going to do our state machine that we just implemented, and we're going to change state. And you'll see that there's two overloads for this now. One if you pass in the state variable, one if you pass in the name. And we're going to pass in the name message, assuming that this is what we name our message state, or name it in the inspector, I should say. So let's go back to the inspector and create a new file here. So we're going to go to our scripts, gameplay, characters, states, and we are going to create a new script. And this is going to inherit. Can I select state from here? I don't think it's going to let me, but no, I didn't think so. That would have been fun though. What we're going to do is we can just make it a node for now. And we're going to actually turn this into our player message state. And we're going to say, okay, sure, we're going to create that. And now you can see our message state is here. So what we can do is we can go to our message state that was just created and start adding our code. So obviously first thing we're going to do is add our namespace. And then what we're going to put inside here is basically we're just going to check the override on our process function. And all we're going to do is check to see if we're scrolling and if the use key is just put. So we're going to make a map for a new key called the use key, which is basically just going to be the space bar or your A key, whatever you want in this context. So we have to check two things. First thing we have to do is check to see if our message manager is not scrolling. So we got to make sure that if it's scrolling, we can't take any input. And we're going to check to see if our input dot is action just pressed, or sorry, is action just released, not pressed, because we don't want to spam it. If we've just released our use key, and we'll define that use key in a second. And if this is the case, we're going to do message manager dot scroll text. If our message manager though, messages dot count is equal to, or sorry, get messages, and then the count is equal to 0. What we're going to do is we're going to change our state back to the roam state. Now, later in the game, when you have more state interactions, the state might be a variable that you set. But for now, we're just going to do our state machine dot change. Oh, sorry, I forgot that I have to make this a state. Now we're going to do our state machine dot change state, and we're going to go back to our I think it was called roam state that I named it. Player roam state. Yeah, so that's roam. And I'm going to save that. So let's go back to the inspector and fix a couple of the things that we've implemented so far. So let's go down and go to our scenes and take a look at our player. The state machine still has this, but you'll see our roam state now has our state owner. And let me rebuild this. The state machine should show up now. So make sure that you assign the state machine here. Double check your state machine to your roam state. Double check this, make sure it's good to go. And now you basically want to just create a new node. So we're going to attach a child node here. Rename it to message. And then attach a script. And that script will be the one we just created. And that will be hiding inside of gameplay, character states. And then here, you have to make sure that you assign the state owner and the state machine. So now if a message pops up, we're going to be changing our states. So now let's go ahead and go to our project and go to our input map. So let's add a new action. And we're going to call it use. And we're going to add the spacebar, wherever that is. I forget how to find it inside this character map, but basically, oh, sorry, here. Now the use key has been added to our input map, so it's an actual control in our game. And we've mapped it to our spacebar for now, but you can map it to whatever you like. So make sure you build the project one more time and then hit play just to see if there's any errors or you forgot to put any references. So you can see this is here, and if I push the space bar, let's see if anything happens. Nothing happens yet, and that's because we haven't fully implemented all of our state logic yet. And you can see that I can move around, nothing's disabled yet, and that's because this actually shouldn't be showing up yet because no message has been playing. This is just a placeholder. So let's go back to our message scene, and let's go to our NinePatchRect, and let's just go ahead and toggle the visibility to off, and make sure you save it. Now go to your message manager, and pass in your NinePatchRect, and then pass in your label to the label, and make sure you save it. And then next we can open up our game manager, and you can see that everything is everything's good to go here. So now if you go ahead and hit play, the box should disappear. Yeah, it's not here anymore. So the next step is let's put in the code to play a message when the game starts up and see what happens. And then what we can do is when the game is ready, after we spawn, we can do message manager.play text, and we can just put some text in here. Let's just test it out and say, hey, welcome to our cool game. And let's see what happens when we do this. So you can see something failed because we forgot a reference somewhere. And it doesn't like it because I forgot to set the instance. Whoops. So whenever you're making a static function, don't forget to actually instantiate it. And how we're going to do that is set the instance equal to this. There. That should fix that problem. Sorry about that, guys. So let's go ahead and refresh. And look at that. It says, hey, welcome to our game. So I'm trying to hit my arrow keys right now, and you can see that it still works. So we're almost there, but my controls haven't been disabled yet. And that's because if we go back to our code, you'll remember that we put this little to-do in here, and that's to actually signal the game that we want to switch states. So that's why you always put notes in the code in case you're trying to teach people how to do this and completely forget what you're doing. So how this is going to work is you're going to grab this by getting the signals instance, getting the signal name, and then I believe it was message box open, and you're going to set it to true. And let's see if we forgot anything else. So you can see down here it says entering player message state. So now I'm hitting all of my input keys. I'm trying to tap them loudly so you can hear. Nothing's happening. But if I hit the spacebar, this should disappear and I should switch states back to my roam state. And look at that, we switched back. So the final test for this would be to go ahead and do a multi-layered message to see it scroll through. So let's try that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our game manager, and then you're going to add one more line here and just say something else. I'm going to say gotta catch them all. And then hit play. And then if I hit the spacebar now, it should show the second message. Gotta catch them all. And just like that, you've implemented your basic UI system. So the next steps for this would be to add entities like signs or other messaging systems, like maybe like triggers when you walk through to play a message. And that way you can actually add some interaction to your game. So maybe we can throw some signs in front of some houses next game, and maybe in front of the Pokemon Center, or maybe in the entrance to this town, and actually give the town a little bit more of some lore. So let's maybe do that in the next video. Okay guys, thank you so much for tuning back in, and we'll see you in the next one.